Were there ever Romans in America? Well, what if I told you that technically it's actually possible that Romans indeed might have been to the new continent? You might at first say that this is utterly impossible, but hear me out because I think we are talking about two different things here. I might be talking about a different kind of Roman than the one that you are imagining right now. So what the hell am I talking about? But before we get to that, you and I love Roman history, right? So if we want to visit Rome, sure, we'll get around with English. However, especially in the smaller towns of Italy, not many there actually do speak English, as I had to find out the hard way myself. So knowing a bit of Italian is super useful for exploring the more hidden ruins of the old heartland of the Romans. And in order to learn Italian, I would highly recommend one of the world's best-selling language learning apps, namely Babbel. I tested it myself, and I can highly recommend it for quite a few reasons. First of all, it was designed by real language educators who know how to best learn a language in the fastest and most efficient way possible. Then, it's incredibly fast. You can actually start speaking a language in as little as 3 weeks. Then these are real-world lessons. You can actually use what you have learned in real-life conversations. I am of course using the app myself and already completed a few exercises, which actually is already enough to have some simple conversations.
Oh, ciao Tommaso, come stai?
Scusi, dove il mausoleo dell'imperatore Maioriano? Questa direzione? Grazie molto. The next visit to Tortona will be certainly less awkward thanks to Babbel. The lessons are super easy and there are even games in the app to make the whole learning experience a lot more fun and to keep you engaged. And you have a 20-day money-back guarantee, which is also a very nice added bonus. And with the special Maiorianus code in the description box below the video, you can get 60% off your subscription, which I personally find an amazing deal. Of course, there's not only Italian, but over a dozen different languages from which you can choose. So start learning a new language today with Babbel. Thanks a lot to Babbel, and back to the video. Well, when I say that Romans actually might have been to the new continent, you probably are thinking about the Romans of the 1st and 2nd century AD, when the Roman Empire was in its prime. You are most certainly thinking of Romans wearing the famous segmented battle armor, the lorica segmentata, traveling across the ocean on their triremes. We would then have the fascinating image in our minds of Romans in their shining armor disembarking on the new world and interacting with the locals there, maybe even exchanging items. After all, some strange items were found in the Americas, such as this head here, discovered in 1933 and buried by the Aztecs in 1510. The head was lying undisturbed there for over 400 years, and it shows some pretty remarkable Roman stylistic features as were common around 200 AD. Or what about the hoard of Roman coins dating from the 230s AD, which were found in 1963 at the Ohio River in the USA? Well, this is certainly amazing, but we should be careful here. The head is indeed super fascinating and could be a genuine Roman artifact from the early 200s or late 100s AD, but one singular item hardly proves contact with the Romans. There should then be many more Roman items found in Native American settlements all over the place, but there aren't more. And others have been proven to be hoaxes, such as this supposed Roman sword here. In the case of the coins, yes, they were found to have been real Roman coins, but that doesn't mean that Romans actually landed in North America and came as far as to the Ohio River. In reality, many World War II veterans brought back Roman coins from Europe and specifically from Italy, and many of these coins were then lost all across the US. But okay, let's assume that the head is genuine, because that one is indeed fascinating. So does that prove that Romans really interacted with the pre-Aztec civilizations of Mesoamerica? After all, we know that the Romans actually did establish a settlement on the Canary Islands. So why shouldn't they travel further west? The problem here is twofold. First, the Roman ships weren't really equipped or designed for such long voyages across the Atlantic Ocean. It is extremely unlikely that they deliberately sailed west because they didn't suspect that anything would exist there. And their ships were so maladapted for such long voyages that this would have been a suicide mission. Now, is it possible though that a Roman trireme came off course and the North Atlantic currents drifted the trireme westward towards the Caribbean islands and then to the Yucatan Peninsula? After all, we can see here that the North Atlantic currents actually would allow for something like this to happen. A Roman ship could have embarked from the Canary Islands and might have been brought to Mesoamerica. However, let's not forget that this journey would have been so long that the poor Romans probably wouldn't have survived, and most likely this would have been a very involuntary journey. If they would have come off course, it is the most likely outcome that they would not have survived the very long journey, since they would have run out of food and water at the latest, after probably not even reaching the halfway point to the Americas. Remember that they didn't need so much food and water, since the Mediterranean, where they usually sailed, even the Canary Islands, are at no point further than a few hundred kilometers away from the mainland. The Romans were excellent at sailing the Mare Nostrum, the Mediterranean, but the Atlantic was just so much larger, and it is super unlikely that living Romans actually did reach the Americas. And if they did, this must have been a one-time thing, and they probably then would have never been able to make it back. But this now is of course pure speculation, bordering on the realm of fantasy. But of course, nonetheless, a lot of fun to think about. And we actually cannot 100% disprove that something like this might have happened. And sure, one of those Romans might have brought this head with him, which then was kept by the pre-Aztecs for over 1,000 years until being buried in 1510 and then rediscovered in 1933. This would be quite insane if true. However, more likely it could have been found by the pre-Aztec civilizations in a Roman shipwreck, which would have been brought there by the ocean currents with no Romans or only dead Romans on board. So then, did I mean this all the time when I said that Romans actually really might have been in America? Actually, funny enough, no, I didn't mean that. I was talking about something else. I should really work on the length of my intros, because I actually wanted to make an entirely different point, proving that Romans actually really might have been in America. But for that we have to think about what Romans actually means. What kind of Roman was I actually talking about? Well, you certainly know that the Roman Empire did not end in 476 AD. The Western Roman Empire, yes, that one did fall, even though 476 AD is very contested, and I would say that the 540s is probably a more accurate date for the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But anyways, I'm again going on a tangent for God's sake, so let's get back to the point. I was of course talking about the Eastern Roman Empire, and that one fell far later than the Western Roman Empire. Namely, it lasted until 1453 AD, when the city of Constantinople, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, then fell. And what happened not long after 1453? That is correct. Columbus landed on the Caribbean islands in 1492. The inhabitants of Constantinople in 1453 very much saw themselves as the last Romans. They never saw themselves as Byzantines. And there are only 39 years between the final fall of Constantinople, which is also called sometimes the New Rome, Nova Roma, and the discovery of the New World. There are only 39 years between those two events. Now you might say, but Columbus didn't actually reach mainland America itself. That is correct. A few years later, and especially in the early 1500s, more and more British, Portuguese or Spanish sailors started reaching the real South or North American mainland continents in droves. In 1513, Ponce de Leon made landfall in today's Florida, possibly not far from the city of St. Augustine, which in itself is the oldest continuously inhabited city of the United States, dating back to 1565. But did the last Romans even vanish with the fall of Constantinople? No, because the last Eastern Roman remnant state was the last remaining part of the despotate of Epirus and the last stronghold, Vonica, which is technically the last surviving Roman remnant stronghold, fell as late as 1479. Now think about this, there are only 13 years between the fall of Vonica and Columbus's travels, and only 21 years between the fall of that last Roman stronghold and landfall in South America. Dozens of ships reached the Americas in the early 1500s, and that number increased even more in the 1510s. But even the 1510s are only some 3 decades away from the fall of Vonica, where technically the last Romans lived. Could it thus not have been that one or the other who lived in some of the surviving Eastern Roman Rum states might have made it on board of one of these ships? Let's imagine, for example, a child 10 years old living in Vonica, surviving the fall of 1479. This person then would have been 44 years old when Ponce de Leon made landfall near St. Augustine in Florida in 1513. Can we then say with certainty that not at least one or the other quote-unquote Roman might have been on board of one of those dozens of ships that by that time would have now started reaching the New World? I personally find that thought utterly fascinating. We sometimes forget how little time there actually was between the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire and the discovery of the New World. So that is what I was talking about. Romans, Romaioi, how the late Eastern Romans called themselves, thus could actually really have been to America. Time would technically allow for this to have happened. A wonderful thought, for me at least, connecting the New World, America, with the Old World, with Rome itself. I hope, dear friends of late Roman history, you found that thought as utterly amazing as I did. I would like to give a big shout out to my Patreon and friend Caesar Cheese, who gave me the excellent idea for this video. And if you like my videos, please support me via Patreon or via a YouTube membership. I personally would be super thankful, and I like to think that Maiorian hopefully also. And of course, please like and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And I would of course like to thank each and everyone who is supporting Maiorianus in any form, be it through Patreon, through YouTube membership, or via a PayPal donation. Thank you so much, friends, for supporting Maiorianus so that I can keep this a channel about late Roman history. And if you want to learn more about Constantinople, the new Rome, Nova Roma, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn more about the last surviving Roman states, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.